So excited to be in community with you all today and welcome you to our third session in a series about advancing racial equity. If this is your first session that you've come to, it's totally okay. There's no prerequisite of having to been in the other two sessions. We're excited to have you and really looking forward to a wonderful conversation today about visioning. And my name is Shannon Scott. She, her pronouns. I am in Catawba land in North Carolina. I just am really excited to spend the next couple hours with you all in reflection and visioning and grounding. This is a beautiful space to come into today. We're going to start with some grounding time for ourselves to kind of orient and create space together. And then we're going to kick it off with our incredible host, Jess Moyer from Frameworks Institute today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nish, my partner.
Thanks so much, Shannon. So, hello. As Shannon said, I'm Dr. Denicia, so many names within Village. And I'm just honored and grateful to be here, to be a part of this racial equity series. Thank you for those that have been a part of the other two, and for those that are just joining today. We just want to orient you to the flow. So, this is a time to be, as Tiara Knox says, vulnerageous, where you have a certain level of vulnerability and courageousness. Because by coming here, you're saying that you're wanting to work towards shifting your perspective and being open to different ways of being in community with those that may share similar viewpoints and reflection points as us, or those that may not. So we just want to open up this space with a time to ground, a time to connect and orient. And as you see with me, that starts with some movement, some rocking, some touch, and just feeling my connection to the earth. I'm standing right now, so I feel my feet underneath me. For those that are sitting, you can feel the comfort and the support of the chair under your bottom, supporting your back. Notice where your breath is at. Oh, I just took a nice, good breath. Is your breathing shallow? Is it in your chest? Just notice without judgment. If you need to breathe a little deeper, you can move your hands to your belly. As babies, we know how to breathe through our bellies, right? You just see their bellies rise and fall, and it's like, yes, nice full breaths. And then we start to suppress our breath, right? In anticipation for things. So just try to create some full belly breaths as you ground into this moment. In honor of racial equity, we always start with an acknowledgement of the land, the labor, and pour libations to those that came before us. So we just want to offer a moment for you to connect with the indigenous land that you were on. I am calling in from Chochenyo, Muwekma, and Ohlone lands in California. These lands that have been stewarded by tribal nations for generations upon generations. The tribal nations that have bled on this land through colonized genocide. The tribal nations that are still here, vibrant on this land, both embodied and ancestrally. The birds, the trees, the mountaintops. Just take a moment to give appreciation to the land that you're on, and the land that you come from. We also give honor to those who have labored on this land, through indentured servitude, enslavement, those who have migrated to this land through hardships and tumultuous situations, those who sacrificed for us to be on this land today. We honor them, we see them, we are here because of them, we stand on their shoulders. Just take a moment to honor those who have labored on this land, labored to get to this land. And within that, we also extend libations, which is the pouring of any kind of element that connects with flow and water. We are using water today to pour back into the land, honoring those voices of our ancestors that are here all around us, those that have been mentors to us, those that are still mentoring to us. And so we offer this opportunity for you to say their names. You can say their names in your heart. You can say their names in the chat that Shannon can read aloud. We just want to give a moment to speak those names. I give honor today to Fannie Mae Hertz, my great-great-grandmother. May she continue to rest in paradise. Ashe. And Ashe just means, and so it is. Amen. Ayaya.
Janice Allen,
Ashe.
Joshua,
Ashe.
Bill,
Ashe.
Leah,
Ashe.
Bill Howard,
Ashe.
Glenn,
Ashe.
George Bell,
Ashe.
Marie,
Ashe. Yes to these vibrant ancestors that are showing up for us in all the ways. So to those named and unnamed, known and unknown, and also to Jean, Donald, Alma, Stephen. Shannon, can you read the last one?
just my grandparents, Naomi's grandparents.
Ashe, Ashe, and Ashe-O. Roy and Anna, Ashe. So we just thank you all for arriving fully in your full selves, in your intergenerational selves, with your ancestral selves, all here today. And with that, we step into orienting to what we are going to have right in front of us. And we're going to start off with a remembering about the pivots. So healing-centered engagement is a framework that was developed by Dr. Shawn Ginwright after 30 years of working with youth and communities that have been marginalized, that have been extracted and exploited, and really being able to go deeper, right? When we think about trauma-informed, we think about being aware of the injustices that have happened on our bodies, on our somas, on our psyche, in our communities. And healing-centered engagement looks deeper at the holistic person, at the holistic environment, the holistic historical perspective, to take full account of what else is true, what else is contributing to these elements, and what is the full expansiveness of the person who has survived and is living and thriving in these elements. And in order to do that, we have to first start with ourselves. And we start by looking at 4 ways that we can pivot. And so we're going to just do a quick refresher on what those pivots are. And then we're going to fully more intro Jess in to lean into the pivot today of vision. So as a reminder, and if you want to go deeper in this, you can look back at our first recording. I'm sure we can drop that in the chat somehow or provide that. And The 4 Pivots is a book that Dr. Shawn Ginwright wrote. So you're also welcome to get the book if you want to read deeper into these elements. But today I'm just going to do a quick refresher that we first start with a pivot in our awareness, right? So we spoke a lot at the first session around and the second session, right? Of how to be aware of the different lenses from our intersecting identities. So the ways in which we show up in the world based upon our cultural reflections and the ways in which the world views us, right? Those are the lenses. That's how we're navigating. And we want to be aware of those things, but also shift into having a mirror reflected back to us, right? Where we're constantly in critical reflection of how does this impact me? Am I in my fullest self? Am I being activated right now? What are the ways that I might have some biases and blind spots? What other perspectives do I need to bring in? You also want to be able to focus on a pivot in your connection, right? So often we engage with folks through transactional means where you do this thing and I execute, right? It's just A to B without much movement in between. And what are the ways that we can create more expansive transformations within how we relate to each other? Shannon and I could have started this Zoom and intro Jess and been like, here you go. But instead, we wanted to cultivate a container of grounding, of presence, of transformative connection. So you could fully be present. And it's going to allow you to be able to go deeper and more expansive in what you create today. A pivot in our vision. Similar to the if-then thinking with transactional, we can often get with that with our visions, right? And problem solving. Here's the problem, I have the solution, or I'm going to build the solution. Let's get straight to it. And the issue that happens there is that if we're not doing these other pivots, we can very quickly recreate the problem that we were trying to get away from. Or worse, we can create more problems, more harm, right? So what we really want to shift into is possibility creating. What is possible? You're throwing everything at the wall, right? You're getting imaginative, you're getting creative, you're getting vulnerageous, right? And then you gather all that together and as a collective decide what needs to get moved forward. And then the last one is a pivot in our presence. We can very easily be stuck in the hustle of this world. Things are spinning very, very quickly. And it's so hard to take a step back, to be still, to reflect, to create that time. But when we do that, we realize that we're able to have the flow that we need. That the things that happen, like we talked about early on, the stagnantness that happens if we're just in hustle all the time, we don't even realize how we're suppressing our voice, how we're compressing our breath. So when you pause and you breathe and you're in flow, you are able to activate healing-centered engagement. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Shannon to open us up into our presentation today.
Yes, we're really excited to welcome Jess from Frameworks Institute, who's really going to help us spend some time in the visioning and think about that possibility creating. So again, we're really excited to welcome Jess. I'm going to add her spotlight and turn it over to Jess.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks, Dr. Denicia, for that grounding and that really warm welcome. You're making me realize that I want to stop and take some deep breaths and be more mindful more often, because it feels good to do that, and it's important to do that, and it's easy to not do it enough. So thank you for that. Thanks for getting us started in that way. And hello to everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I hope it can be a conversation. I want to invite you to, we will have some kind of opportunities throughout, and I'll offer some prompts for you to do some reflection or some sharing. But if there are things that you're thinking about or wanting to share with the group, feel free to write into the chat, or to just unmute yourself and share, or ask a question, or offer your thoughts. So I'm Jess Moyer. I use she, her pronouns. I am joining from Nacotchtank and Piscataway lands here in DC. For those of you who don't know frameworks, we are a research organization. So we study the relationship between culture and communication. I think we're really different from a lot of other kind of what you might think of as communications organizations or comms firms. What we're focused on is long-term social change. So we want to understand, what is the culture that we live in? How are the ways that we communicate shaping that culture and also reflecting that culture? And then we search for, develop, and test and identify alternative ways of talking, alternative ways of communicating about lots of important issues that really matter for all of us, in ways that can helpfully shift our culture, to encourage us to think more, be more hopeful, to have an increased understanding about the world and about the challenges we face, and also the kinds of problem solving and solutions that we can implement together. So just that's kind of an overview of who we are as an organization. And what I'm sharing with you today are some insights that we've gathered across lots of different kind of projects that we've worked on, studying different social issues. These are insights that I hope are interesting, but also I hope are useful. I hope these are things that you can take away and think about, and maybe think of as suggestions or ideas. Think about if there are ways you can take them on board, and that they might be able to help you do what you're already doing a little more effectively, a little bit more easily. So that's the goal. I wanted to just give you an idea of the plan for the session so you know what to expect. I know it's some people may need to hop off at the top of the hour. That's entirely okay. Do what you need to do. We're glad to have you for as long as you can be here. The session is kind of divided into three different sections. So in the first part, I'm going to just offer an overview of framing what it is, how it works, how we think about it, some different kind of broad concepts to get us all on the same page about what we're doing here and what this is that we're talking about. In the second section, we will talk, I mentioned that we try to understand the culture, the kind of current landscape. I'll share with you some of what we've learned through that research, what in particular, what some of the kind of dominant mindsets are that exist in our culture, and how they can intercept our communications, how they can present some challenges when we're wanting to have productive dialogue. And then the third section is all about what works, offering some techniques that we've identified through the research, things that you can use, strategies that can ultimately advance equity through our communications. That's the goal here. And then, so there'll be some opportunities to reflect, like I mentioned, and then also a chance for you to talk to each other. We'll go into breakout groups, and you can kind of discuss and share your thoughts and get some time to practice with each other. So I wanted to start with a question for you, an opportunity for you to think and do some sharing, although we're not going to share just yet. We will share this a little bit later on in the session, but it's a really simple question, and as with all the questions that I ask throughout the session, there's not a right answer. There are no right answers. I just want to know what your thinking is, what your answer is, and what, in this case, what does equity mean to you? We're here to talk about advancing equity, just so we can think a little bit more deeply about what that means, what that actually is. I'm gonna let's maybe take 2 minutes. Let's take 2 minutes for all of us to think about what is equity. How would you answer that question?
Okay, got it. Okay, okay.
Okay, in these last 30 seconds, if you haven't done so yet, write down what you're thinking. Make a note of it at least, so that we can come back to it and revisit it a little bit later on. Okay, so let's talk about framing. Framing, oh, I already introduced frameworks. We can skip that slide. Framing is something we're all doing all the time when we communicate. It has to do with not what we're saying, but how we're saying it. It's all the different choices we make about what parts of a message we want to emphasize, which parts of it, maybe which parts we leave unsaid, which parts we go into a lot of detail on and really explain. It can involve what types of values we want to appeal to in a particular message. Sometimes it can be what metaphors we use to explain a concept or to help people understand what we're trying to say. So framing involves lots of different choices. And if we're communicating, we are framing. Sometimes we frame with intention. We make really kind of conscious, intentional choices about how we present what we want to say. Other times those choices get made kind of without us even realizing that we're making them. But it's always the case that whenever we're communicating, choices are being made about how we say what we want to say. I think it's important to stress the point that framing it's not something that we either do or don't do. We're doing it all the time, but it's not like flipping a switch. It's not a thing that that has to do with use this word or don't use that word. It's a lot more complicated than that. It involves lots of different kinds of choices, but also it involves kind of a spectrum of ways of communicating. So it can be kind of like dialing up a particular emphasis. It could be widening the lens, so we're helping people see the bigger picture. All of these are different types of framing choices. And framing matters because those different framing choices that we make really do impact how our messages are received and how the folks that we're talking to, in whatever context that is, that can be in a one-to-one conversation, it can be in a report that your organization puts out that folks read. It can be in a talk that you give. It can be written or spoken, but all of those framing choices affect how our audiences think, feel, and act as a result of hearing our message. So rather than just describe this point, I want to kind of give us an example to see how that works for ourselves. So we talk about different choices have different frame effects. It's just another way of saying the same thing. Different frames make audiences think, encourage audiences to think, feel, or do things differently. So on the screen here, you'll see the same question, but framed in two different ways. And specifically, the same question is framed with a different value in each case. So in the first case, we're appealing to this value that we share of the importance of free speech. Given the importance of free speech, the question is, would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? Now we could frame that same question a different way, appealing to a different value, in this case, being free from violence. So the second framing is, given the risk of violence, would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? So just take a second to reflect on those two framings of the same question. Does each of those frames make you think about something different? Do you have kind of different associations there? Do you feel differently when you read one frame versus reading the other frame? What are the different things that you feel? And then what are you inclined to do? What's your answer to that question? Would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? Would you answer that question differently in one case versus in the other case? Or maybe even if your answer is the same in both cases, do you feel more strongly about it in one case than in the other case? That's another reflection of how a frame can impact what we're inclined to do. So these two questions were actually part of a research study not done by Frameworks, but by another organization several years ago. And they found that the two framings actually do produce really different results. In the first case, 85% of participants, an overwhelming majority, said, yes, we should allow that group to hold a rally. In the second case, it was not even half, well below half. So framing really matters and has sometimes very material, kind of immediate consequences. That's a case of asking individuals how they think, feel, or do differently based on a frame. What we're interested in is kind of scaling up those frame effects. So thinking about how different communications choices can drive broad social change in the long term. This is our theory of change at Frameworks. It's the idea that if we start communicating differently, those shifts, those changes will filter up into the discourse. They'll be reflected in the media, in entertainment, in how prominent individuals with a lot of influence speak. And that shapes how we think as a culture, our mindsets, which in turn has an impact on what we do, the kinds of decisions that we make together, the practices that we adopt, and the policies that we set as a society, which is what changes outcomes and can potentially improve folks' lives. That's ultimately the goal here. Social change for better outcomes overall. Here's an example of how that kind of social change through narrative and communications change is possible. This is the example of tobacco. So for a long time, a handful of decades ago, we thought about and talked about tobacco as a vice. It was a thing that individuals were tempted to do and use, and it was a sort of an irresponsible behavior choice. That's how it was thought of. It was viewed through this lens of individualism. People should not use tobacco. They should make better decisions. When we recognized that tobacco use was leading to all kinds of health problems and it became a social issue, because we were viewing it through this individualist lens, the solutions that seemed to make the most sense were kind of public education campaigns, efforts to convince individuals to make more responsible decisions. So it was an individual response rather than a collective social one. There wasn't a lot of support for policy change, for different kinds of collective decision-making. But then we saw a shift. Instead of thinking about tobacco use as a vice, as a personal kind of bad habit, we began over time to think about it as a defective product. So the emphasis on the who kind of shifted. It was less about who was choosing to use tobacco and more about how is it getting produced, for what purposes. We were thinking about advertising. We were thinking about for-profit entities. And we were beginning to think a little bit more collectively about our collective responsibility, our shared responsibility to protect ourselves as consumers from this defective product, this harmful substance that we were being exposed to, which meant it kind of made more sense to adopt some shared responses, some social change as a result. And that's what we saw. We saw policy changes. We saw things like restrictions on advertising, especially around schools, and we saw changes to where the kinds of places where smoking is allowed, in planes and in public buildings, et cetera. So those policy changes, those kind of shared practices, shifted the landscape in which individuals made decisions. We were seeing it as and appreciating it as a social issue rather than just kind of blaming individuals for bad choices. And then we have also seen a significant decrease in the amount of tobacco use and all the negative outcomes that are associated with it, illnesses, et cetera. So there's more work to be done there, but it's a case study where we've seen significant progress in terms of policy, and alongside that, thinking and kind of culture. So our research process, I won't get into specifics, but there are 3 phases. The first phase is map that cultural landscape, identify the dominant mindsets. The second phase is identify those frames, those communications choices, not in what to say, but in how to say it. Identify ways of talking that can, I think of it as kind of productively tilling the soil for change. So framing is not about getting specific people to do a specific thing, or even about a specific kind of policy change. It's not about shifting a particular decision. It's about frames that shift our collective thinking, and that has implications for lots of different decisions and lots of different policies. And then the third phase of research is to share the strategy. That's what we're doing today. I'm sharing some insights with you, and we can talk about it together and kind of adopt it as needed. But the goal is to certainly not to all start saying the exact same thing, but the goal is to think about how we can amplify each other's communications, how we can be talking in ways that are reinforcing the shared vision we have for the kind of social progress that we want to make. So I'm going to start with sharing some of those cultural mindsets that we've identified. And whoops, hit the wrong button there. There we go. And I'll just get a little more specific about what we mean by mindsets, because sometimes it's confused with kind of public opinion research, and mindsets are actually really different from opinions or attitudes or convictions. So when I'm talking about cultural mindsets, I'm talking about not so much what people think, but how people think. What are the patterns in reasoning? What are the assumptions that exist? What are the top of mind associations that are kind of beneath our thinking collectively. And that can be kind of activated and pulled on to interpret and make sense of lots of different topics. Cultural mindsets are widely shared. We're interested in the ones that we all have access to. So to be clear, it's not at all the case, obviously, that we all think the same way. But it is true that because we share a culture, there are certain ways of thinking, certain patterns in thought that are more common. And because they're pervasive in the way that they are, we're all exposed to them and kind of influenced by them in some way, in different ways from each other. It's oftentimes the case that a particular cultural model will be more easily activated in one person or one group than another, or maybe it'll show up more strongly or more often. But these are the cultural mindsets. They're cultural because they're widely shared across our entire culture. And we're looking at the United States, not global culture, but within our national culture. Multiple different mindsets exist at the same time. There are productive ones and there are unproductive ones. And part of what determines whether a particular mindset is productive or unproductive is what the goal is, what we're trying to achieve through our communications, what we hope that the outcome will be. And the last thing is that mindsets have the potential to prompt us to either feel like the way things are is what makes sense, is the way they should be, or the way that they inevitably will be. Or, and oftentimes it's the less dominant mindsets that do this, the slightly alternative ones, that can prompt us to think about what could be different, or to take a critical view, to critique the status quo and explore possibilities, think about what we could do different or better, or what we might want to change. So I'm going to share 3 dominant cultural mindsets. Again, this is not what people think, it's how people think, so they can be activated across lots of different issues and in lots of different kinds of contexts. The first one is, and I mentioned it earlier, this idea of individualism. It's kind of a lens on the world, but it's a mindset that assumes whatever outcomes a person experiences, their successes, their failures, all of that is attributed to the individual decisions that they make. So someone who has experiences lots of good outcomes, is very successful, within this mindset, when it's activated, the idea is that person probably made a lot of good choices. They were responsible, they were hardworking, and that paid off. That's the explanation for how they got to where they are. And the opposite is also true. If a person is struggling or not doing well, or has failed at a particular task, the thinking when this mindset is activated is they should have done something differently. They made bad choices. They engaged in the wrong kind of behavior, etc. A second mindset is this idea of fatalism. So fatalism is just kind of a sense that there are certain problems, certain challenges that we face that we can't solve. They're just too big to fix. This gets activated when we are confronted with a crisis, a really acute situation that we feel like we don't fully understand, or maybe just feel overwhelmed by. Those kinds of things can activate the sense of fatalism and the mindset that goes with it, which is sort of an inclination to disengage and to feel a sense of hopelessness about the potential for change, the potential for fixing what's broken. And then the last one is, I think, the most pernicious of these 3 dominant mindsets. It's a way of looking at the world through an us-them lens. So it kind of assumes that there's an in-group, a standard or normal group, an us, right? And that people outside of that perceived normal are somehow different or other, quote unquote, them. So lines of difference can be drawn in all kinds of ways. across race, across age, across geography, location, across marital status, you name it. We can kind of draw these lines between us and them in lots of different ways. Our research shows, and this probably isn't a surprise to anyone on this call, but one of the most frequent ways that this us-them mindset gets activated is in thinking about race. It's often very racialized, in which case it's whiteness that is perceived as normal. It's kind of taken for granted. And non-white groups, people of color, are seen as somehow different or other, or not belonging. So again, this mindset can look a lot of different ways. There are different kind of variations on it. The ugliest and kind of most toxic, most harmful version of this mindset is where we refer to it as pathologizing. It's where it's not just the idea of difference that comes to mind, but it's the sort of sense, again, not a belief or an opinion, but a kind of latent sense or assumption that a particular group that is not the default sort of presumed normal group is not just different or other, but is actually inherently flawed, is somehow less than or inferior. So obviously that is a really ignorant mindset. It's really harmful. It's often even very dehumanizing. What's hopeful here is to remember that because it's a latent way of thinking, it's not an opinion. It's not a thing that people have carefully thought through and will defend or even assert. It's often not explicit. It's an implicit, often subconscious way of thinking. It means that it's activated, it exists within folks whose opinions are actually very different and oftentimes even the opposite. This mindset can be activated in folks who say, I'm committed to racial justice. I know that all people have dignity and equal value. That's, I think, what we can kind of hold on to, and also from a communications perspective, what we can reinforce and build on and pull out. We can strengthen that alternative mindset, and shift thinking and push the otherism mindset into the background. We can work to deactivate it, not just not activate it, but to deactivate it through our communications. Okay, so that was a lot of me talking and a lot of things for me to share so far. I want to give you all a chance to do a little bit of processing and to talk to each other and to ask questions if there are things you're wondering about. So let's move into breakout groups, which I will.
We've got them. Kim's setting them up for you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Kim. That's perfect. Could we do maybe like 5 people per group? And the invitation here is just to think about those 3 dominant mindsets that I've shared: individualism, fatalism, and otherism. How do you see them show up, either in your work or in your life, in your experience? Where have you seen them, and how did they show up? What did they look like? What was it that people said or did that made you think maybe this is part of what was going on there? Maybe this mindset was somehow at work in that situation. I will type that question into the chat so you all have it as a reference before you go into groups. And then you'll have 10 minutes and feel free to introduce yourselves to each other first if you don't know each other yet, and then just share and talk about what is helpful for you. Okay, there's the question. And we can move into breakout groups whenever you're ready, Kim. Thanks for setting those up. We'll be in groups for 10 minutes.
Hey Jess, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I have too many windows going on here, and I realize I can't tell if do people make it into the groups?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. I should have probably set those up so I could just hit the button, and I didn't do that at the beginning. So that was really helpful that you could do it. Thank you.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Sorry, I went with too few people in the groups initially, so I had to do some last minute scrambling. So sorry about that. And
No,
now
it's
I
my
see
fault.
that
It's my
we
fault that I didn't ask ahead of time.
no worries. And I think we do have a couple of moderators in with them, which is great, but that's why we have slightly more than 5 in a couple. So yeah, but hopefully people are finding some good chance to connect. So
Perfect. I hope so.
Do you need anything else, Jess? Or do you, I'm not sure if there's another breakout session that'll come up at a
There
different time.
is one more breakout session. Let me just think. I think we could use the same groups for the second one. If we do that, they'll know each other already, and might it might be nice to be able to kind of build on that and follow up. Does that work? Kim, are you able to just save those groups and then? Oh, you know what? I just realized though some people might hop off at the hour, so we'll have a different combination of folks.
we
Well,
will, I'm afraid. Sorry, go ahead.
it'll still be the same folks in the group. It just might be less people, right? So if some people hop off, instead of having 6, it might be 4. But I think that's a great idea just to keep the groups intact. That way they're building together.
Okay. Great.
Hi, Tammy. Welcome into the space.
Thank you.
We're just in breakout groups right now. We have 6 more minutes in the breakout. Okay.
Sorry, I just moved her.
Okay. I didn't know if we wanted to tell her,
Yeah.
but
I think she was in she was in earlier, I think. I think she just like hopped off, and so
oh, okay. Thanks, Shannon.
That works.
the magic of internet, just moving people around.
Right.
I also did I miss so yeah, I'm juggling all my windows here, and I feel like I might have missed some things in the chat. Shannon, did you text me?
I had just messaged you to confirm because Kim and I were figuring out, oh, we should probably set up breakout groups. So I messaged you to just be like, how many people you want? Because Nish and I couldn't remember if you had said that earlier when we were on our planning call.
Oh, you guys are great. You're well ahead of me. Thank you for thinking about that.
Yeah. Our hypothesis was 4, so we were close.
That would have been great too. If I had known you had groups of 4 ready to go, I wouldn't have disrupted the process.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if nothing's needed, I'm going to take these last 5 minutes to step away, take a stretch break, get some air, and I'll see you guys in a few.
Thanks, Dr. Nish.
So I did try to do the 10-minute countdown, but I did it in a hurry. So I'm thinking it should give us the countdown, but I'm going to run to the restroom, but we do have a little under 5 minutes left. So
Okay.
I set my timer too.
It's so helpful that you did that. Thank you.
Oh,
Shannon, I know there was some discussion about how to edit the recording afterwards, and wanting to just protect people's privacy if folks are feeling vulnerageous in this space, but maybe don't want that to be posted online. I was just thinking about in terms of inviting people to share out when we come back together.
Yeah, I think you can name that like LSA will edit out individual responses from the published recording. Yeah.
Great. Cool, thanks. I might not do it this time anyway, but that's helpful to know for the next one.
Yeah. Two seconds.
And we're almost back.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some good discussion and opportunity to share and exchange thoughts with other folks in your group. Oh, here we go. Now folks are coming back. Okay, I think we're all here. Welcome back. I hope you had good discussion in your groups. We will have some opportunity to share and discuss as one big group. I'm not going to take time to ask you to share out what you discussed in your small groups at the moment. But if there's anything that really stands out to you that feels important that you want to make sure to share with the bigger group, feel free to drop that into the chat or to raise a hand if it's something you'd rather say. And it feels that important, and it's you want to share it. Raise a hand or unmute or drop it into the chat. So, oh, Ken, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I just want to credit my group. I think it was Elena, that I felt a great sense of agency, from her comments that while these are dominant mindsets, how we move in the world, like how we operate as a team or an organization, as people, like we have the power to counteract mindsets like this fatalism, individualism, by working collectively, by thinking of inclusively, into promoting opportunity and thinking in the opportunity lens. So I felt coming out of that feeling a great sense of agency that, again, like you said, while there are these dominant mindsets, we have agency as people to work through those and to do that in a collective way with others who share our values, So I wanted to appreciate that comment and the whole group.
Thank you, Kent.
Thanks for sharing that. I love that too. I hope that's a takeaway for a lot of folks, because there are things we can do, and this is a tricky landscape that we're navigating, but we have some strategies for navigating it, and it's a shared endeavor to do that. We can do that together. Great, thanks. Okay, open invitation to raise a hand anytime you have something else you want to share. Thanks for that, Ken. So we talked about those 3 dominant cultural mindsets, how they're part of the landscape and patterns in thinking that affect how we interpret, as a culture, how we interpret lots of different topics. I wanted to just share that there are some more kind of specific challenges around talking about equity, which is part of what we're here today to talk about. Equity is a tricky concept. We have done research to try to understand what it means to folks, how it's used, what associations and assumptions exist around it. One of the things that we learn is it's not top of mind for most folks. And that feels weird to those of us who are thinking about it and using that word a lot of the time. But for the broad general public, it's a word that doesn't mean a whole lot, doesn't come up a whole lot, and also for which we don't have a shared understanding. So even where there are some associations or where folks have heard the word, do use the word, it's in a lot of different kinds of ways, which can be tricky when we're wanting to communicate and be clear about our ideas and have some kind of shared understanding about what we're talking about. So I want to show a short video clip. This one is from one of the methods that we use in our research, and it's where we were asking participants really general questions about what does equity mean to you? What comes to mind when you think about equity? Open-ended questions like that, just trying to understand what's people's starting point. So here is a video clip, and I will play it now.
So the first is equity. And I'm wondering if you all have heard that term before, you might have some thoughts about what it might mean.
That's all. Kind of like home equity?
Some sort of loan.
You bought your house for, say, 200, 250, and some years later it's worth 400. That gap there is equity.
Equity in a life insurance policy, what you've built towards something, in my opinion, is equity.
Equity is kind of like basically how much leverage you have. So like you own a business or something, how much money like your business is worth.
Are you talking about money, money equality?
And if you think of equity in relation to race, what would be your guess of what it might mean?
Like racial equality, same thing? So is it equity, equality?
The sense that I get is that when people are saying equity, they mean something more specific than when they're saying equality, but I definitely have not seen it explained.
Providing everybody with the same opportunities to be able to be successful, no matter like what level they're on.
I have not heard it mentioned as far as people. I mean, normally you hear about equity in your home.
Especially if you're poor and if you're Black, you know, a lot of us, we like a couple generations removed from like slavery. So a lot of us are still trying to build from that gap and trying to get to that level where we have equity and stuff to leverage.
People have been saying racial equality forever. Why is it changing to equity now? Who's saying equity?
So we saw a lot of different responses, a lot of different kinds of thinking there. A couple of things I just want to point out is, so one was at the beginning, you saw that folks are thinking of a whole different kind of equity when that word is used. They're thinking about equity in a home or business. And even when it comes to talking about equity in relation to people and in relation to racial equity, racial justice, there's confusion about the word, but also I think it's really important right at the end, you saw someone kind of pushing back a little bit. Like, we've been saying equality for a long time. What's all this equity stuff? Who is saying equity? We actually have seen a pattern of that in our research where there's almost a backfire effect. There's a frustration about the lack of clarity, or a sense that it's something that folks are expected to know about, or that it means something that they may or may not want to agree with. So it's a word that I think it's fair to say it's a word that sparks a lot of different kinds of reactions with a lot of different groups. And so a big takeaway here is we can't just rely on the word equity itself to do the work for us. If we want to, basically, if we want to have control over our message, if we want to know that what we're trying to get across in our communications is what our audiences, what folks are taking away, it's what they're understanding what we're trying to say, we need to do more than just use that word. And also just want to be clear, I'm not at all suggesting that we shouldn't use the word. I would never say don't use that word. I wouldn't say that about any word, actually. It's never the case that I would say always use this or never use this. But it does mean that we oftentimes, a lot of the time, need to do more than just use the word itself. So it's helpful to, for example, instead of just using the word or the phrase, offer a description. What is it, if using just kind of plain language, what is it that we're talking about here? What is it that we're wanting people to understand? Maybe it's actually more of a value than a kind of a specific concept or process. Maybe it's we're wanting to appeal to something that we believe in. Maybe it's the idea of fairness or dignity. And we can use words like that are not as likely to spark that backfire effect and may actually be a little bit more clear, where there's a shared understanding about what we're talking about. Sometimes it is an explanation that works better. Maybe we're talking about something that is a little bit complicated, and what we need is to help people understand it, and we need to give more of that explanation so people can see what it is specifically that we're trying to talk about. And even in cases where we want to use the word, and sometimes I think for folks who are committed to advancing equity, it does feel really important to be able to use that word. So using it, it's never a bad idea to offer a definition alongside with the word itself. So even if you're talking to folks who share your understanding and share your values, it's a way of affirming, here's what we mean by them. It's not just a signifier of, I'm one of you or I'm part of this group, but it's, here's why we're using the word and what we mean by it and what it is that we're wanting to, what it is that we share and that we care about and that we're trying to do. And then the other thing is that we have a lot of other tools available to us for advancing equity beyond just use of the word itself. So we can use the word, we can use descriptions and a definition, and we can use other strategies that aren't explicitly talking about equity, but are advancing equity when we use these other strategies. So let's talk about what those other techniques, what those other strategies are for advancing equity beyond use of the word. I have 4 that I want to share with you. This is a slide that lays out the 4 of them, but I'm going to walk through each one individually, and we can have a chance to practice a little bit and to do a little bit of a deeper dive. And in each of these cases, again, it's not here's a word or phrase that does the work. It's a shift in practice. In each of these cases, we're talking about vision, the vision pivot. So in each of these cases, it's about what we focus on in our communications. And oftentimes it's about a shift in focus and making that shift intentionally. So here is the first recommendation. Focus on what should be, not just what is. So it's not that we can't talk about what is or what challenges we face or things that need to be addressed, but put the focus on what could be and what should be. Another way of saying this is offer up a vision of what's possible. That's a way to encourage more expansive thinking, more hopefulness, and to kind of paint a picture of what we're aiming for, what the aspiration is here. What are we trying to get to that we want to get more folks on board with? So here's an example of what that could look like in communications, how you can shift that focus to include more of the what should be, what could be, what's possible. So instead of this is sort of a before-after example. Instead of, we are committed to ending hunger, eliminating poverty, and dismantling the structures that create food insecurity, perpetuate economic inequality, and prevent children from learning and growing. We could say something more like this. We are committed to building a society where nutritious food is readily available in every community. Wages and incomes allow families to thrive, and all children grow up healthy and strong. We're focusing on what we want to see, what should be, and offering up a vision. So here, just to highlight some of the words, again, it's not that they're right or wrong words, but we do use words to shift that focus. Here are some of the words that are doing the work in this case of shifting the focus to what should be. Instead of talking about hunger, we're talking about nutritious food being readily available. Instead of talking about poverty, we're talking about wages and incomes that allow families to thrive, a thriving wage. Instead of talking about inequality, we're talking about making sure that all children are healthy and strong. You can see how some of those framing shifts will make people think and feel differently. Okay, so here's another chance to reflect. Revisit that description of equity that you wrote at the beginning. And I think this is a group that has probably done a lot of work to kind of be specific and think through what you all mean when you use that word equity. But do a double check, look at what you wrote down earlier, how you define that concept or what it means to you. Are you focusing on what should be? Are you focusing on that kind of positive vision for the future, the possibilities? Or is it more focused on problems? Is it focused on what is? And a little bit of balance oftentimes makes sense, but think about where the focus lies. Where's the emphasis? And we're not going to break into groups here, but towards this goal of kind of getting to a place of shared understanding about what we're talking about, if any of you are feeling vulnerageous, I love that word, I hope I got it right. I invite you to share in the chat, to type your description of equity. What was it how did you answer that question earlier? If you're willing to, if you're up for it, take a second to share it, and then we can also read what each other has written. And there's no judgment here. The idea is none of these are wrong, none of them are bad. Every communication is a work in progress. And by sharing our different kind of responses here, the idea is we can think about where there are things in common between the different descriptions, And also maybe where we want to tweak what we've written, maybe where we want to dial up the possibility or dial down the kind of problem focus. So let me navigate to my chat so I can see what everybody's writing. Oops. Okay, great. We've got a couple in here. It's okay too if you don't want to share, but hope you feel encouraged to if you're up for it. Great, thanks to those folks who've shared yours already. I'm loving reading these. Terrific. Thanks, folks. Feel free to type if you are still working on yours and you want to type in after I keep moving on. Feel free to do that. I think we'd all still love to read them and to see what you came up with. Okay. So the second recommendation for advancing equity is to focus on what's true instead of what's not. That might seem obvious, but it's actually hard to do, especially when we know that the landscape is fraught. We know that there are myths or harmful ideas or stereotypes that are out there that are harmful, that we want to refute. We want to disprove them. We want to confront them head on. That's often an ineffective way to achieve what we're trying to achieve. It often has the unintended effect of giving that harmful idea or that untrue idea even more oxygen. It oftentimes lifts it up even more, even though the goal is to stamp it out. So to show you an example of a study that kind of showed how that phenomenon works. This is a myth fact sheet. It was produced by the CDC. It's a pretty standard one. I'm sure we've all seen myth fact sheets. This one was about the flu vaccine. The idea behind it was there are a lot of myths kind of floating around about the flu vaccine, how it works, or what risks are involved, or what it doesn't do. The CDC wanted to set the record straight and kind of quash all of these myths. So it's a flyer that has the myth that's swirling around, and then the fact, the kind of rebuttal to that myth, what's actually true in each of these cases. There's one example. There's a myth that the flu shot can actually cause the flu. And then the CDC tries to clarify the flu shot cannot cause the flu. Here's what's really going on. And they give the kind of accurate side of the story. So what the researchers who looked at this, it's a real flyer that was circulated. What the researchers who studied it found was that folks who read this flyer actually misremembered the myths as true. Those myths were already kind of in the public mind. They're already dominant ideas. By repeating them, the CDC actually just made them dig in more. So people remembered those myths, but this time they were remembering them as being true. And that phenomenon got worse over time. So a couple months down the line, more of those myths were remembered as true than immediately after reading the flyer. And then maybe the worst part of this, those myths, because they showed up in this flyer that was produced by the CDC, now the myths were being attributed to the CDC itself. So people were saying, I know that the flu causes the flu, or the flu shot causes the flu because I read that on a flyer that was produced by the CDC. So it reinforced the myth, and it kind of emboldened it and gave it some even more legitimacy and credibility by having it linked to a particular source with some authority. Okay, so the takeaway here is don't communicate from a defensive stance. Understand what it is that you want people to know. What's the idea that you're trying to get across? And be mindful of the landscape. Know what you're up against, but don't repeat those ideas that you want people to forget. Instead of rebutting directly, try a reframe. Try emphasizing the thing that you want to put on the public radar, the thing you want people to be thinking about more. Saying that and spending your kind of precious communications real estate, that whatever time you have with your audiences, use that on the things that are true, that are important, that you want to say. Okay, here's an example. Instead of this message, here's the before. Being poor is not a choice, but the majority of the country still seems to believe it is. The reality is that even full-time employment is not enough to raise and support a family when it's a minimum wage job. So you can kind of feel some defensiveness here. It starts out with, this is not the case. I know you think this, but it's not true. And then it goes on to say, the reality is you can tell that it's responding to something that exists rather than making the affirmative case. Here's how we might do that, make the affirmative case. Now we're focusing on what is true, what we want people to know and to take away. The current minimum wage is well below what's required to raise and support a family. As a result, many single parents, including those who are employed full-time, simply don't have the resources they need. So the myth here that the person who wrote the original message, the myth is that people are poor because they choose to be, because they don't work hard enough. I'm sure this is I would guess this is a myth that some of you have encountered yourselves. It's obviously harmful. It's wrong, but repeating it actually has a way of reinforcing it, driving home that association between poverty and between people who are poor and their bad choices. It's reinforcing the idea that it's due to individuals themselves if they're experiencing hardship of any kind. Okay, and in this case, it's not quite as blatant as a myth fact sheet, but we can see some of the language that kind of illustrates that it's a defensive communication. It's trying to refute what's not true rather than focusing on what is true. In this case, it's saying this is not the case, and we can reframe it in terms of this is what's happening here. Okay. Recommendation number 3 is about focusing on the why beyond just the what. So this is about helping people understand that there's a process at work. Instead of just focusing on the outcome, or if we're talking about challenges, instead of just focusing on the symptoms of a problem, building the underlying causes into the story, and not in a way that is necessarily here's a specific problem and the specific symptoms of that problem, but in a way of wanting to get at why and how we got to where we are, rather than just we're in a bad place right now. So before I show a before after example, take a look at these 2 options here and see if you can identify which one includes the why, which one offers a little bit of information about the underlying cause, the reason behind the situation that we're talking about. So don't type into the chat just yet, or you can type it, but don't send it. I'll just give everyone a minute to read, and then I'll let you know when you can hit send and type either A or B into the chat. Okay, go ahead and hit send. Type A or B and share your answer. Great. We've got consensus here. It seems like everyone's saying A. Yep, and you're all right. So that first one, it even has language that signals that we're getting at the why. The language it helps to explain why, right? We're seeing some of the reasoning. We're not just talking about the outcome, which runs the risk of getting us into that victim blaming situation of people kind of coming to their own conclusions about the why. In this case, we're naming it ourselves. Okay, here's one more. Take a minute to read, and then I'll let you know when to share your answer. Which one includes the why? Okay, go ahead and share your answer. Yeah, perfect. Lots of B's. Great, okay, you all get the idea here. So here, let's look at a before after. Here's the before. Rent burdened is defined as having to spend 30% or more of pre-tax income on housing. Almost twice as many Americans are rent burdened today as compared to a decade ago. And here's how we could reframe that message, focusing on the why rather than just the what. So because US wages have been stagnant over the past decade, while housing prices have increased, today's minimum wage isn't enough to rent an average one-bedroom apartment. That word because is a good signal here that we're getting at some of the why. And instead of focusing on the people who are struggling, who are experiencing rent burden in this case, that focus on the why actually gets at the underlying causes here, which are US wages are really low. They've been stagnant. We're talking about housing prices, which are going up. That's important. Getting at the why is really important, first and foremost, because it alleviates some of that undeserved blame on individuals and individual behaviors, but also because it points to some possible solutions. Wages, housing prices, those are things that we can address through policies, through shared decision making. It's kind of signaling that this is a social issue that we need to tackle together. Okay, and then let's get to the fourth recommendation. And this is where I'm going to give all of you a little bit of a chance to practice. This recommendation is to focus on the whole rather than individual parts. Advancing equity requires a big picture view. So it involves putting individual people within a context, within the context that we live. It involves putting behaviors within a social structure. There are reasons and incentives for all of us to do the things that we do. Certain actions are easier or harder than others. There are structural factors at play there. We need to put events within an ongoing process and kind of help people understand how they occurred and also where there are kind of opportunities for intervention rather than just thinking about a sort of a slice in time. And then the last one is putting outcomes within an environment and building some understanding about all the different influences and factors at play that lead to the particular outcomes that we see. So this is a big task in terms of framing and communications. Helping people see that big picture involves a lot of different things and is kind of complicated. It's sort of a heavy lift when it comes to framing, but we have tools that can help with this. And there's a particular one that does a really good job of expanding thinking and kind of encouraging us to zoom out and take in that wider view. And it is the power of metaphor, a particular frame. I mentioned metaphor earlier. Metaphors can facilitate new ways of thinking. They can open up thinking. They are really powerful framing devices. And They do a lot of good work, but we also always say, because they're so powerful, it's really important to use the right metaphor, because metaphors can also go wrong. They can be powerful in ways that we might not expect or might not want them to be. So we're a research organization. We always test our metaphors, and we think it's wise to tread carefully when it comes to metaphors that are untested. I'm going to let folks who can make this case better than I can explain or just make the point that it's important to use the right metaphor in the right instance. Here's a short video clip.
I don't like you. I think you're a fake cop. If we were in the wild, I would attack you. If I were a lion and you were a tuna, I would swim out in the middle of the ocean and eat you. Okay, first off, a lion swimming in the ocean? Lions don't like water. If you placed it near a river or some sort of fresh water source, that makes sense. But you find yourself in the ocean, 20-foot waves, I'm assuming it's off the coast of South Africa, coming up against a full-grown 800-pound tuna with his 20 or 30 friends, you lose that battle. You lose that battle 9 times out of 10. Did that go the way you thought it was going to go? Nope.
Okay, so you get the point. That's an example of a metaphor gone wrong. But I'm going to share a metaphor with you that we have tested through rigorous means in one-on-one communications, in group communications, written and spoken. This is a metaphor that expands thinking and facilitates more productive ways of thinking about relationships, the importance of relationships in child development and family well-being generally. It's a metaphor of roots, thinking of relationships like roots. That's the way a metaphor works. It takes something that's kind of a new or complicated or sometimes abstract concept and compares it to something that is concrete and familiar and more straightforward. And that comparison, making that comparison means people can map all different kinds of aspects of the issue onto the idea that they already understand really well and kind of make sense of lots of different things at the same time. That's one of the ways that metaphor is so powerful. So here's the idea of the roots metaphor. Just like root systems are fundamental to plants' healthy growth, relationships provide critical connections that support children's healthy development and stability. Now, that's not at all like, it's not a sentence that you want to plop verbatim into your communications. This is a sentence that conveys an idea, this idea of thinking about relationships as roots. It's the concept behind the metaphor. Here's an example of that metaphor in use. And there are lots of different words and phrases that you can pull on to activate this metaphor. But here's one example. And I'll just share that this is a communication that came from an organization we work with that it's a group of lawyers that are advocating for, in instances of where a family is implicated in the child welfare system, that the child and the parent both receive high quality legal representation and interpretation and social work support, et cetera, in addition to the state having access to those resources. So that's where this specific communication came from. And here's how the before is without the roots metaphor language, and then I'll show you what it looks like with that language. So our vision is that children will not be damaged by the system set up to protect them, that families will not be destroyed by the system set up to heal them, and that every parent and every child will have high quality legal representation and support so they can succeed. There's a lot in there. We can use the roots metaphor to facilitate interpretation of the message and also that big picture thinking. Here's an example of what that might look like. Our vision is that the child welfare system will nurture the development, health, and well-being of the children and families it serves. We advocate for a model of legal representation that nourishes the whole family and cultivates strong, stable relationships. It's not the content of the message here that I am wanting to draw your attention to. It's the framing of it. It's the use of that roots metaphor and the language that that helps kind of conjure it up. So what are the words that you're noticing here, or the phrases that make use of that roots metaphor? And you can just type it into the chat as you notice it. Which words are standing out to you? Words that relate to the metaphor of roots. Terrific. Nurture, cultivates, strong, nourishes. Yeah. Good. Yep. Lots of you are finding these ones. Excellent. Okay, here are the ones that came to mind for me. A lot of the same ones you all were noticing. And again, there are no right words or right answers. There are a lot of different ways to apply a particular frame, especially when it comes to metaphor. There are lots of different ways to get creative and imaginative and to use it. So let's do a quick brainstorm and get the creative juices flowing a little bit. We will break out into groups in just a minute. But while we're all together, I just want to invite you to think about what words or phrases come to mind for you beyond the ones that you saw in that specific message. There's a prompt on the screen to help you think about the different kinds of words that are available: nouns, verbs, adjectives. You can think about symbols or images that come to mind for you, but whatever comes to mind, don't censor yourself at this point. It's all fair game. Type into the chat and share what you're thinking of. Words and phrases that relate to this idea of roots. The other thing I'll say is that the roots metaphor is so effective because it conjures up an ecosystem. Roots belong within an ecosystem, right? So we're talking not just about a specific person or a specific relationship. We're talking about the whole context. We can think about what's in the soil that nurtures that relationship. We can talk about the sun. We can talk about the quality of the water. We can talk about our ability to the possibility of interventions. We can water the soil. We can be part of nurturing those roots. We could talk about the relationship between the roots and the plant itself. So go ahead and type words into the chat. Any words that come to mind for you that relate to the roots metaphor. I'll get us started here. Great, I'm loving this. Good ones. Okay, everyone think of one more word and type it into the chat. We're gonna use these as a resource for the next activity you'll have that's whole word bank and brainstorm available to you to prompt more thinking. Beautiful. These are really good words. Lots of variety and really creative thinking here. I love this. Okay, terrific. So let's move into our last breakout room activity. What I want you to do here is, again, it's a chance for you all to talk to each other and to share. And if there are things that you're kind of mulling over or wanting to chat about that don't answer these questions specifically, that's okay. It's time for you to use in the way that's most meaningful for you. The questions that I'm suggesting to think about are starting to get at that question of what are the things that you are wanting to communicate about? What are the ways that you're wanting to build public understanding or shift public thinking? And how can these tools that I've shared, these framing recommendations, help you do those things, achieve the things that you're wanting to achieve? So in this case, what are the kinds of relationships that are important in the context of the work that you do? What is it that you hope more people have a better understanding of about those relationships? In other words, how do we want to kind of shift public discourse? What do we want people to be more aware of and more thinking about the importance of relationships? And then does any of this language that we've come up with, any of these really creative words and phrases, any of these images, do any of these help you talk about relationships in ways that are maybe less kind of technical or less rigid than you might be inclined to? It's opening up new possibilities of thinking and also communicating, ways to talk about relationships that are likely to resonate with folks. And it's inviting people into a conversation, starting with something that's familiar and makes a lot of sense and is kind of a welcoming concept. And I'll also say you can use it to talk about things that are working really well, the kind of thriving aspects of roots and plants and ecosystems. And you can also use it to talk about where there's maybe the soil is lacking nutrients, or where we haven't gotten water in a long time and there are challenges, and we want to think about what's needed or what we want to improve, or where change can happen. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen, and Kim, if you're able to make breakout groups again, that would be terrific. I will plop the questions into the chat really quickly, so everyone has those as a resource. And then I'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
I feel like we're all looking at like 5 screens, right?
I definitely am. So that's the agenda pretty much. I would love to invite people to share things if they want to within the big group when we all come back together. I don't do you have a closing that you want to do, either Dr. Nish or Shannon? Should I just thank folks and close out myself?
We have a feedback survey that we want to give them, so I'm going to drop the link in the chat. So I'm happy to give voiceover to that, or just in your closing if you can point to it. Either one works for me.
Okay, I'll toss it back to you at the end if that's okay.
Yeah.
And Shannon, if you want to do like the one word or phrase that people want to drop into the chat.
Yes.
Something like that.
Can do.
Sweet.
That would be great to see too.
And Jess, do you want this chat saved and sent back to you?
Yes, please. If you can do it, that would be amazing. That would be really helpful for me. Thank you.
Kim.
Yeah, Kim's nodding yes, so awesome.
That's so
Yes,
helpful.
no problem. 6.5 minutes left.
Great. Thanks for tracking that. I think I'll just leave my slides off so we can all see each other for the last couple minutes of discussion. Anybody have tricks for managing multiple screens? I clearly am not very good at it.
Unfortunately, I have none to offer.
Kim, do you think we could bring people back at 10 of? I know that's a little bit shorter than 10 minutes, but I don't know if they'll have a lot to share, but that would allow us time if folks do have stuff to say. And also I won't risk bringing people over the hour. I want to respect that folks are busy. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So that's 2 more minutes. So maybe, yeah, so maybe at like 2:22, we can do a quick broadcast message and say, hey, coming back shortly, and give them a chance, and then we'll close. So
okay, great.
Great.
Is that something do I broadcast?
Yeah. Well, I think you should, right? I think co-hosts have it as well. So if you look in the breakout room panel, am I right?
Yes. Yep, I see the broadcast.
Okay. Okay, great.
Oh, thanks.
And feel free, if you'd like to just do the broadcast and close all the rooms, that's just fine too.
Okay, I forget I have lots of power to do this stuff too.
The power is with you.
Okay, I'll write a broadcast message now. If I close the rooms, it still does a 1-minute countdown, right? Okay. Yes, it does. Okay, I'll just close them and then give folks that 1 minute remaining.
Jess, I'm sorry, all the alarms went off in my building and I missed one of your slides. Is there any way you could go back to the big picture slide?
Sure. Yep, I can do that.
Probably noticed me getting up very quickly and I'm like, what in the world?
That's inconvenient timing.
Oh, yes.
Let's see the big picture.
It's in the fourth focus.
Okay. Let me just pull it up and then you can.
I'll just take a picture and you can do your thing. I think it's the next one.
Is that it?
37. The next slide.
Oh, wait a second. Sorry, it didn't advance for some reason. Let me try this again.
Ah.
Okay. I can also share the slides with everyone, so you'll have it as a resource afterward.
Thank you so kindly.
Yeah, of course, happy to do that. So welcome back, everyone. These last 10 minutes are just a chance for you to share, if you would like to, what kinds of discussion you had in your small groups, to offer reflections, thoughts, to ask any questions that you have. So I'll just open up the floor to anyone who wants to share anything. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. What was it like for you in the small group discussion? What kinds of things came up?
In our small group discussion, one of the members, Valentina, shared that she finds reframing things really useful. So unhoused as people who are going through a situation and just need some help, like kind of directing to something that is provides like potential for another experience based instead of like the focus being on they're unhoused or they don't have shelter, but that there's a process that's happening and that there isn't just one answer at the end. I found that really useful.
Thanks for sharing that.
Quite honestly, to build on what our colleague just said, it makes me want to take every single thing that I write or I'm about to say and run it through a program like AI that's trained to help reframe everything to make sure I'm not transgressing. And I'm hearing you very clearly, Jess, that there's no right or wrong. And your examples have beautifully pointed out the value and the power of thinking about how we're setting things up. So thank you for that.
I've also wondered if we could get AI to do all that work for us. That would be really handy.
So the relationships in my current context are really important because, and it was someone else in our group that shared, it was like someone is acting as though they are the cut flower that is so beautiful for such a short period of time, because cut flowers don't last forever. But when you have something that is in a pot and you are nurturing the pot and the flowers are growing and it's going through this life, right? And I'm noticing in my current context that there may be some people who are hurt and are pouring unhealthy nutrients into the potted soil. So how do you reframe that pot? How do you nurture the soil so that things continue to grow, and rather than have people pluck the flowers and just wither?
Wow, that was a lot of really beautiful metaphorical language you used there. You pulled out what we at Framers call entailments, which is different aspects of the metaphor, different ways that it can be used and can kind of pull at different processes, different aspects of that big picture. And for other folks, when you were hearing that, did you notice that you started to engage more with the topic? You were more curious, you were interested, you were kind of making sense of it. It felt resonant or relevant. Those are really powerful effects of a metaphor, especially when you were able to use so many different types of words, so much different types of language to get at the ideas. And another thing about metaphor is that ideas that we arrive at through metaphor are stickier. We retain them longer. They make more sense to us at that first interaction, but we also can hold on to them more because we are understanding them not as abstract, kind of isolated facts or ideas, but as part of a big picture. So they continue to shape our thinking and to stay with us over time. That was a really wonderful kind of illustration in real time. We have time for maybe one more person to share if you would like to, just an invitation.
In our group, we talked about there's just so many different metaphors, but like the transformational nature of thinking about like a tree, which is like you have a long-term relationship with the tree and the soil, and moving from a transactional to like a transformational perspective on relationships, and that continuous nurturing of the soil or the relationship.
That's very cool, connecting to the other pivots. I love that. Thanks so much, everyone, for engaging and for the great input and reflections. I will hand things back to Shannon.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and your energy and your commitment to this work. We know that you care so deeply about your communities and the work that you do and the folks that you serve, and we care about you caring about them. So we really appreciate your time and commitment to this space. So we also believe that feedback is a gift. So we have a very brief survey. It's only a couple questions. If you can give it back, we'd really, really appreciate it. And just thank you all so much. If you want to put a word into the chat that sort of is your takeaway, a word that's coming to mind of something that you're going to take in the next rest of your day or the rest of your week. Gratitude, roots equal self-care, yes. You can feel free to put more words in the chat. Thank you again. Wishing you all the best.